Pan-Africanism is more than just a political idea. It's a revolutionary movement that has sought to unite African people across the world. From its inception, Pan-Africanism has envisioned a future where African nations and people of African descent are united, free from colonialism, and stand in solidarity against their mutual oppression. But what exactly is Pan-Africanism? Broadly defined, Pan-Africanism is a political and social movement aimed at the unity of all African nations and peoples, both on the African continent and across the African diaspora. It's rooted in the belief that people of African descent, whether living in Africa or abroad, share common experiences of colonization, racial oppression, and exploitation. At its core, Pan-Africanism calls for solidarity among African people and a shared commitment to self-determination, independence, and development. Over the centuries, various leaders and theorists have shaped the Pan-African vision. Today, we'll highlight four key figures who contributed immensely to the growth and evolution of Pan-Africanism. First, we have Henry Sylvester Williams. Williams was a Trinidadian lawyer, writer, and activist who is considered one of the founding fathers of the Pan-African movement. His work in organizing the first Pan-African Conference in 1900 and his advocacy for the rights of African people around the world positioned him as a key figure in the early development of Pan-Africanism. George Padmore was a prominent Trinidadian-born writer, journalist, and political activist whose work significantly influenced the development of Pan-Africanism in the 20th century. His contributions to Pan-African ideology are crucial because he played a pivotal role in shaping the intellectual and political framework that guided the movement toward African unity and independence. His book, Pan-Africanism or Communism, in 1956, was a groundbreaking text that examined the relationship between the African liberation movements and global political ideologies like communism. He was a leading figure in exposing the brutal realities of European imperialism and colonial exploitation through his writings and public speeches. Padmore worked with many leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, to develop strategies for achieving African independence. His political insights helped shape the anti-colonial movements across the continent. W.E.B. Du Bois, an African-American scholar and activist, was one of the most influential Pan-Africanists in the early 20th century. Du Bois believed that the liberation of Africa from colonial rule was intrinsically linked to the liberation of African descendants across the world. Du Bois played a significant role in organizing the first Pan-African Congress in 1919, which brought together activists from around the world to discuss African independence and racial justice. His emphasis on the need for global solidarity between people of African descent became a cornerstone of Pan-African ideology. Du Bois directly influenced a number of key African independence leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta. His Pan-African Congresses provided an important platform for these future leaders to connect and strategize, while his ideas helped shape their visions of post-colonial Africa. Next is Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born leader whose message of African pride and self-reliance resonated globally. Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, and advocated for the return of the African diaspora back to Africa. His Back to Africa movement and the call for Black economic empowerment made him one of the most significant voices in Pan-Africanism. Garvey's famous slogan, Africa for Africans, at home and abroad, captured his vision of a united and prosperous African homeland. Garvey believed that Black people could never achieve full freedom and equality in countries where they were marginalized and oppressed. Instead, he argued, they should establish an independent African nation where they could control their own destinies. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of an independent Ghana, was arguably the most ardent African leader advocating for Pan-Africanism in the post-colonial era. Inspired by both Du Bois and Garvey, Nkrumah saw the liberation of Ghana in 1957 as the first step toward the unification of Africa. He believed that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked up with the total liberation of Africa. Nkrumah was a key player in the creation of the Organization of African Unity, now known as the African Union, which aimed to foster cooperation among African nations. Nkrumah was also a key proponent of the idea of a United States of Africa. So, what are the key beliefs that underpin Pan-Africanism? Here are some of its foundational principles. Number one, unity and solidarity. Pan-Africanism emphasizes the need for unity among all people of African descent. Whether they live in Africa, the Caribbean, the Americas, or Europe, Africans are seen as one people with a shared destiny. This unity is critical for economic development, political independence, and social progress. Number two, liberation and self-determination. One of the core beliefs of Pan-Africanism is the right of African people to govern themselves, free from foreign domination. It was a driving force behind the anti-colonial movements of the 20th century and continues to inspire calls for African nations to resist neocolonialism and external influence. Number three, economic independence. Pan-Africanism advocates for economic self-reliance. It challenges the exploitative practices of colonialism and global capitalism that have historically drained Africa of its resources. The goal is to create sustainable economies led by Africans for Africans. And number four, cultural pride. Pan-Africanism celebrates the rich cultural heritage of Africa and the African diaspora. It calls for the rediscovery and promotion of African languages, traditions, and values that were suppressed during colonial rule. In conclusion, then, Pan-Africanism remains a powerful force for change in the 21st century. Whether through political activism, economic development, or cultural revival, the dream of a united Africa is alive and well.